Ready to explore the cutting edge of digital infrastructure? I'm Carrie Charles, your host of Let's Get Digital. Join me as we dive into the ideas, technologies, and leaders transforming the way we connect, from wireless telecom to fiber networks, data centers, and beyond. Sponsored by Broadstaff in partnership with RCR Wireless News. Now, let's dive in and let's get digital. Welcome back to Let's Get Digital. I'm Carrie Charles, your host. I'm thrilled that you're here. We have got just a really amazing episode for you today on AI. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Go get a cup of coffee, cup of tea. You are going to learn a lot because my guest today is Suman Kanuganti, and he is the CEO of Personal AI. Suman, thanks for joining me today.
Carrie, glad to be here.
Yes. So let's first learn about you. How did you get started? How did you get into this world of AI?
I'm an engineer. I grew up in India, came to United States almost 20 years ago. I did my master's in robotics. And since, I was a kid, pretty much as a person that grew up in the technology world, there was a point in my life. It's like, what do I want to create? Like, what do I want to build? During that time, I was at Intuit and I chose to, kind of switch gears and get my MBA as well, and then start jumping into the startup world and creating products and services. So I started my first company, which was called Ira. It's an AI company as well. This is for people who are blind and low vision. So that is now a default accessibility standard for, a lot of blind people. And in 2020, I started Personal AI with this core problem of, like, how do we predict somebody's thoughts, right? Like, what does it mean to be creating the intelligence based on a individual perspective? Like, what would Carrie do? What would Suman do? So that started our journey in 2020. And naturally, as a technologist, we landed on AI as a necessity to solve the problem. So AI wasn't the starting point as much as we had a clear problem of like memory, recall, intelligence, thoughts. So fast forward 5 years later, here we are building a mainstream AI company, in the small language model era from a technical standpoint. But at the core, we are so personal to individual people, and everything that we do is centered around the knowledge and experiences and relationship as lived by a specific person. And now it's expanding into things as well, such as a robot or a connected car, which we can talk more about, but I will pause there to your point on the background.
So Suman, one reason why I really wanted to have you on the show is that you work with telecommunications companies. You work with all the major carriers. So tell me, what are you seeing inside those networks that the rest of the industry doesn't realize yet?
The internet is evolving, or how we use internet for everybody is evolving. If we start thinking about like past 2 or 3 decades of internet, we've been consuming information through the keyboards and mouses. But the most fascinating thing about AI is, for the first time, we are getting to a point where we can interact with the digital world, with the computers much more naturally, which is simply being able to talk to the computers. And where does the talk happen? Predominantly, it happens on the networks and the voice. One fascinating insight is you have in a day 1 billion Google searches. You know how many phone calls that happens in a day? It's actually 3 billion, right?
Wait, how many again? Say it one more time.
Calls per day.
Oh my gosh.
And this is like strictly within the United States. Now, the interesting part is when you start thinking about like the searches, you are mostly seeking information, consuming information, right? But when people talk, they create. And why is Personal AI interested in creating? Because we are after creating individual, private, proprietary intelligence, right? For the next generation of lived, because we already do have lots of technology around equalizing the consuming of information. Now from search to AI, which is much more sophisticated, much more faster, you get answers much faster and you can talk as well. So with telecom, what's happening is the voice experiences which happen on the telecom networks are proprietary, are private, are regulated. And traditionally, when telcos have enabled the data accessible, through smartphones, we have seen a lot of apps, right? If you start like in your imagination, when telcos will start making the tokens available on the network, you will see a lot more agents, and these are the possibilities of what is happening within the telco networks, but yet still fulfilling the highly regulated, notion of the telecom networks.
So, Suman, everyone's talking about making AI more personalized, but most approaches are focused on context and prompting right now. Why doesn't that work, and what does?
Oh, wow, I'm getting technical now.
Let's go.
So, I mean, it's basic, right? Like, if you think about personalization, what does personalization actually mean? Like, personalization mean the information about, individual peoples to make the experiences much more relevant and personal to you. And traditionally, the way personalization has worked is every company or every service provider has their own sets of personal profiles. Like, for example, if you go to Amazon.com, right? Your shopping experience is your lived experiences and shopping experience based on your past behavior, right? So you have a profile on your shopping. And same thing with, if you go to, a Walmart.com versus, a Netflix, for the media. So with AI, a lot of personalization comes with like knowing who you are as an individual person and having that memory captured for AI to learn about you, so that there is a lot more tailored information, tailored experiences, tailored tasks that can go on behalf of you. So with large language models, generally the idea of the personalization comes from, taking all the personalized information and then giving it to the AI to get a response back. It works very well until the idea of personalized memory, the idea of the specific memory that is relevant to you starts growing, over a period of time. And in the concepts of tokens, which is like the unit of, exchange from an AI perspective, you can only squeeze so many tokens in the context window for your AI to be accurate and, more importantly, economical, right? You're taking like this already bloated LLM and then trying to push even more personalized information. Things starts getting confusing, and north of like 30, 40,000 tokens, you will start seeing, unstable like results where things are not predictable, not deterministic anymore. So it's as simple as physics to a larger degree, where the idea of like just squeezing the memory in the context window wouldn't scale for, larger amounts of personalization. Plus, it won't work economically if you are planning to give this to millions of people.
So is this an example of that personalization? Many times with ChatGPT, I don't really provide a lot of context, or my prompts may be very, very short, but it seems to know me really well and then answer as if I had given it a very long prompt. Is that an example of personalization?
Yeah, that is a good example of personalization. And, assuming you have a login, depending on your setting, you can, likely use, if you're a user of ChatGPT, it is highly likely, you may be using the historical conversations of what happens in that particular session, for example, for getting more and more personalized experiences, more and more personalized responses, right? So it's almost like seeing through the world through your lens. Now multiply that with, 100 times in regards to the personalization, right? That's kind of where personal AI comes into play, because most today's AI starts with AI and goes down to personalization. We start with the individual, we start with the identity, we start with the memory, and then work backwards. So that's kind of a good mental model to think through. What does personal mean?
So NVIDIA is pushing a concept they call the AI grid. You're one of the first software companies building on it. So what is this and why does it matter?
Yeah, I will give you an example. AI grid, from a purely technical standpoint, is simply distributed inferencing. What does it mean? Instead of having the AI value from a centralized location, from like one location or from a cloud, right? We are getting to the point where the demands of centralized computing wouldn't fulfill the entirety of what AI is seeking and what people are seeking for the next generation of experiences. So we have to go distributed. One such simple example, back to the basics, is power, right? You cannot technically squeeze in, the GPUs and the capacity that is demanded in one data center, in one town in Kansas City, because you run out of power, right? So you'd start thinking about, distributing that inference workloads, and that's the AI grid. But if you step back and look at, the advantages, the benefits, and the reasons why this is really, really, really important, we already talked about power, right? Power, when you have distributed, then you do not have, one town like struggle out of the power, and they don't have to live in the dark, So there is that core fundamental necessity, it's almost like, the people are expected to have power, right? But if you step back and look at like the accessibility of AI, would you, prefer to pick up your mail by going into a, central post office and stand in the queue, and where one person is looking at your, mail address, going to the mailbox and, handing the mailbox to you? Or would you, walk to your mailbox, that is sitting in front of your home, and then pick up your mail, right? So that is as simple as the concept of, AI grid, which is the AI grid is those mailboxes in front of your home, right? It's closer to the user. It's convenient. You are saving power. You are saving gas, right? The time, the efficiency, everything that goes with it. And that's what telecoms are doing. Like, NVIDIA AI grid is how do we get access to AI closer to the customers, closer to the users, right? Because we are moving the penetration of AI from enterprise value to consumer value to small business owners value to every person, right? It's a new form of internet. And here is the most beautiful part, like just to, if you encourage or entertain your imagination of back in the days, in rural villages, in people, they don't have access to smartphones. So that means they never had access to internet. But now, pretty much, I don't have the stat, but a lot of people has access to, WhatsApp and basic internet. Now, if you think about what does that mean to the AI, right? The beautiful part of AI is only one phone call away, and phone calls are widely available, accessible, across the planet than actually internet.
I was looking on your website and so fascinating. So you develop an entire AI team for companies, personas such as CEO, COO, sales and customer success, HR, onboarding, legal, financial, corporate strategy. I mean, it goes on and on. I was just blown away by this. But what are the risks of companies relying too heavily on AI for these types of roles?
The risk is privacy. The risk is human judgment, right? Of course, we are personal AI, and our motivation is to, augment intelligence from an individual perspective and people, and for companies to do more, right? There are certain nuances about, AI taking over the jobs, but I do not subscribe to that. Fundamentally, every revolution, every industrial revolution, there is always going to be a shift, and the timeline or the time horizon of that shift, only, condenses over a period of time. With AI, it's even shorter. So what does that mean is, yes, there is going to be short-term pains where people has to rethink, students have to rethink what their core competencies and the skills and ever evolving techniques are to eventually leverage AI, as another tool to create more, right? So if you look at S&P 500, with every industrial revolution, you only have, yes, you will have a dip and then you will have, abundance, right? And the curve goes up onto the top right. And with AI, it's going to be, even more curvy. So that means we should be happy that the future, of like general living and the humanity is going to be, more in abundance and not less. So coming back to the basics of the risk of a company using it, I think heavy reliance and having guardrails, privacy, ensuring what you're dealing with in regards to where the data is going, which companies are you dealing with, LLMs, SLMs. We are, of course, like a, very privacy-centered company, and our architecture is very much, core to protecting the data of the people, of the companies. So obviously that's kind of my, push. We don't want to do it any other way. We don't want to do it shortcuts, which was a hard problem to solve, and then we took time, to get to the point where we are 5 years ago. But here.
So describe the company of the future where, let's say, all of the roles I talked about, whether it's from CEO, COO, I mean, all of these roles are handled by AI agents. And what's the involvement of humans? And do you really see companies that could be $1 billion company with 5 employees, human employees?
I won't be surprised when that happens. However, the question to ask ourselves is the value that that company creates is going to sustain for a long period of time, right? So what is the sustainable value that you're able to create? So I tend to think a lot of applications are like short-lived. Now, the good thing is I think it may be valuable enough for those 5 people. However, are you going to move the needle for the entirety of the economy by providing that value? I have my doubts, right? So the question is, you can, argue that it is really good when your revenue per employee is, skyrocketing. It is, it's closer to $1 billion or $100 million, which is fantastic. But what is the economic value you're creating per citizen, right? That is a different problem altogether. So do I see $1 billion company with 5 people? Maybe. But how many $1 billion companies there will be with 5 people each that is actually going to serve the entirety of the humanity? I'm not sure. So I think all those companies will be very short-lived, short problems. With, companies that are looking through the broader ecosystems are the ones will be winner in creating value over a period of time. However, it is a fantastic opportunity for, freelancers, for individual people, for creative people to really think through the next generation of AI experiences, very similar to how, the Instagrams and the TikToks and the YouTubes has created an opportunity, but also it created a debt, which is like the data aggregation in the big tech companies, right? So I think that's what I mean. Like, it's a newer set of like a cognitive challenge for people. However, some people see that as an opportunity. Some people see that as a doomsday, right? So.
Right. And speaking of opportunity and doomsday, there are so many layoffs, even in telecommunications right now. Thousands and thousands of people have been displaced in other industries, all over the country, all over the world. So what would be, in speaking of, retraining, upskilling, what would be your advice for people who either have been displaced, laid off, or maybe even, like you said, the younger generation that's entering the workforce? What do we all need to do? What do we need to learn right now?
Yeah, other day I was on a panel and this came up as well. The two key metrics that I would say is speed and quality. So in other words, the dynamics of what you're able to produce are rapidly changing, which is how can you create like a high quality output, call it a task, you can go from any range like operations to accounting to, writing to creative, like however you want to think about it, right? But the desire from whoever customer base that you are serving comes down to the quality and comes down to the speed. So for the unfortunate reality is every often, and now it's like time is shrinking, we as people cannot take things for granted. In other words, we would have to keep upskilling ourselves and adapt to the next opportunistic, technologies or non-technologies as well, or skills as well. So human skills are going to be fundamental. It's almost like non-AI skills are going to be fundamental.
Right. That's good news. Good news.
So I would think about it as no differently than, learning a new programming language, right? Early on when the computers came over, it's like, oh my God, like all the accounting jobs are going to go away, right? But accounting jobs has, kind of dramatically shifted. And now there are more specific experts and things have moved and, people have adapted. So this is a short-term pain. That is for sure. It is a short-term pain. But if we choose to get comfortable with discomfort and kind of step up into the growth mindset and think through, what's next in my career, then the upside is a lot greater. And for people who choose to not do anything about it, it doesn't matter if it is AI or not AI. The people that, will live, economically like in a different status, right? That's a choice that people tend to make. So yeah, I think it's a deliberate choice that you would make, whether you want to upskill, you want to invest, or you want to ignore for a long period of time until it starts hitting you.
You said something so brilliant, which is get comfortable with the discomfort. I want to repeat it. So, everyone hears it, but that concept is what we all need to do right now. And the other thing is get into the growth mindset. So I wanted to repeat those two because Suman, you nailed it. And that's where we all need to be right now. I do want to ask you another question on the AI personas with your company. So as we, build or hire these digital coworkers, how should companies think about governance, accountability, and trust with a workforce that's not entirely human?
Yeah, super important concept. Not even concept, it's almost like a necessity now. I mean, it's a plug to personal AI to a large degree because if you think about equalizing the information that is available out there in the world, thanks to big tech to a large degree, because LLMs are going to be accessible for everybody. AI is going to be accessible for everybody. So that means now, if we start working from a place of everybody has the same playground, right? Everybody has the same access. Then comes, okay, so then what's unique? Like, what's unique between a specialized doctor versus somebody who is trying to figure out their prescription, using AI, right? So it comes down to not just simply policies, but fundamentally core architectures of how things need to be developed to protect the new creations from the vantage point of entities such as a business, whether it be big or small, entities such as a individual person, big or small, right? And I think that is the future of economy, because the thoughts that you produce, the things that you create will start having economic value, and we cannot think about throwing that away to aggregate into the aggregation of the platforms. The reason why we go via telecoms and sell through telecoms is highly regulated industry. We want personal AI value to be highly regulated and protected, in the benefit of the people. So by virtue of choosing to serve telecoms, we are adding tons of value that creates mass impact, not only accessing like a personalized tokens and personalized AI for individual people, but also it's private, it's regulated. Nobody can touch it. I know for the fact that this is not going to be aggregated, into a big tech, right? That's how I see. It's not revenue per employee; it's the economic value per every person on the planet, right? So yeah, I mean, it goes deep. We can talk about governance, policies, controls, regulations, depending on what company you are, such as, in the finance industry or non-financing industry. At the basic, it's about privacy. Security exists, like, the data exchange around the security exists, and we cannot conflate security with privacy, right? And the privacy is about creating that value back to the company and back to the user in a much more transparent.
So with personal AI, I read that it's not LLM. You are pro-human. So what does this mean? And how can customers benefit from this strategy?
We say no LLM from a sense of not everything can be solved by LLM, right? There is goodness in the knowledge from an individual perspective. So when we say pro-human, the next creation of intelligence is going to be by the humans itself. All the data that exists available right now is already part of the LLMs. So that's a great equalizer, yeah. So the idea of the no LLM is not the go-to for every creation of the future. You start thinking about from a people's perspective, and then there is an intelligence layer that will be created per individual basis for how we think about the growth in the future of the overall humanity, for example.
So let's get out your crystal ball and tell me, what does AI look like in 5 years?
AI in 5 years, it will be more trustworthy, more natural, more penetrating, creating more value. And we will start seeing newer experiences, which I'm excited about. We'll start to see more robotics in our lives, right? Not just from an industrial robotics, but, the robots that will deliver your mail, your pizza, to, potentially the introduction of consumer robots at your homes, because autonomous cars took a long time, but they're already here, right? So I think AI is going to kind of unlock and open newer experiences, and I'm looking forward to it because it's going to be fun, it's going to be new, it's going to be energizing and creating newer value, and at the same time equalizing. It's going to be a great equalizer for the countries that require growth, economic growth. Yeah.
So Suman, what is your personal vision, long-term vision of personal AI?
I mean, personal AI, by definition, our grand vision is for everybody to have their own personal AI that is, in their truest form, because that will be the, future asset for everybody, where your thought will have, some economic value. Yeah. So, we chose an alternative route to kind of make that more private, more regulated through telecoms, and can't wait for the future of AI.
Me too. In fact, this whole time I've been thinking about all the different roles that I need in my life. that personal AI can help me with, and the robots and what they can do. So I'm excited about the future. And also, we all need to have, like you said, Suman, a growth mindset. So thank you for coming on the show. This has been highly informative.
Thank you, Carrie. It was fun.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Let's Get Digital. This podcast is powered by Broadstaff, a national staffing firm specializing in digital infrastructure talent. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join me next time as we explore more stories at the intersection of technology, talent, and transformation. Until then, let's get digital.